Hey everybody, it's AJ from the Two Chaps Pod, ready for another episode. This is going to be part one of 3 videos talking about the purity culture. So there's going to be some talk about sex, just letting you know right off the bat. But what purity culture was, in case you didn't grow up in it, was just this mess of legalism that told you everything you couldn't do instead of why you should glorify God. And we get into a lot of those discussions over these next 3 videos. So make sure you're liked and subscribed to our YouTube channel for when these videos drop. Without any further ado, part 1 of purity culture and its failure on the way now. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Two Chaps Pod. We have another episode tonight, kind of like the one that you listened to on the defense and entering the military as Christians. This one is a deep one and a heavy one that's going to create, I'm sure, some hopefully conversation, not necessarily division. But we're going to talk about the purity culture. Let's just rip the Band-Aid off right now. So there will be talk about sex. There will be talk about the purity culture. And it's based upon a question that we received a while ago on Uncultured Dad. Coleman and I both write for Uncultured Dad, so make sure you check out that website for a bunch of Christian blogs and resources. But this question is very important because, even as chaplains, we have soldiers that are dealing with these types of things as well. So if sex makes you uncomfortable, sorry, but that's what we're talking about tonight. Here's the question. I just want to throw it out there. Let's rip the Band-Aid off because as you growing up in the Lutheran tradition, you kind of revealed to me this really wasn't something that you dealt with. And I feel like it was something that I was inundated with consistently throughout my upbringing. So here's the question. It says, what is purity? As parents who grew up during the height of purity culture, what does purity mean? Is it more than just not having sex? What's the influence of modesty? And how does this look different teaching our boys and teaching our girls? So the difference between teaching our boys and girls about purity and modesty and all of those different things. Growing up in the Lutheran tradition, this wasn't that big of a deal?
So,
not that it's not a big deal, but it wasn't like harped upon.
Yeah, no, not especially in and like I told you, I grew up in a more progressive, liberal, if you want to use those words, Lutheran church. What is the ELCA today? Which, if you don't know what that is, you can go check it out, but just be
careful,
leery of what you would see.
They're the ones with the Sparkle Creed. Let's just be honest.
Yeah,
they're the ones that have the Sparkle Creed. If you don't know what that is, I would advise not Googling it, but you could, and that is not who Coleman is, by the way.
Correct. And so that's, and that's actually a good example because that's the fruit of kind of the wishy-washy or indecisiveness, or at least not addressing it of sexuality that was going on back then. Okay. That's why it just wasn't why it was never really brought up. When I growing up, this purity culture, I guess I did see it, but I was not inundated like you were. There were things that I was challenged on, and I was mentioned to you, before we started with, and I don't remember the title for it, but it was this card, like a purity card, of signing and saying I'm not going to have sex before marriage. And I do remember also because I dated a Baptist once.
Good luck.
Yeah, and
sorry, that's not a lie. Well, that was a very generalized good luck.
And it was we went to this retreat camp. It wasn't a camp. It was just like an overnight thing.
I can imagine exactly what happened at that too. Was it with her church?
Yes.
I can tell you exactly what happened. Was it during the winter or the summer? Was it a skiing trip?
No.
Snowboarding trip?
No, this was just like it was just like an overnight at the it was kind of like a lock-in, but it was
Oh,
more
at the church. Okay.
more yeah, yeah.
So there wasn't like
But
a
it was
service or anything.
at the end of it there was.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Um but
Probably a
yeah,
ton
it
of
was
emotional manipulation because that's what ruled
yes.
youth
So
groups in Baptist churches
so
during the
so
height of this.
so that's what it was. And that's
Yep.
the one thing that I do remember from this um is it was
Yeah.
a True Love Waits thing is what it was
Oh.
called. Um so you're slapping your head like that like I'm
I don't know if it's
like I'm inflicting
PTSD flashbacks or what,
okay.
but
Yeah.
yeah, just
Yeah.
continue because
And
I
so
literally, as a high schooler, had a promise ring, a
yeah,
purity ring that said
okay.
"True Love Waits" on it.
Yeah. So
So
and the
dumb.
thing and
God bless.
there was this and I get what the leaders were going after. But it was this sense of fear that was placed upon you about it. And
Yes.
the illustration that they used was they took two pieces of tape, and I think they like it started out kind of like as a joke, like they put it on somebody and they were like, okay, rip it off, and it was that was kind of the lead in part of like, okay, let's put it on somebody hairy and rip it off and stuff, and they were like, okay, now try to put the two pieces of tape together. Okay, it's not sticking as well. Now if you do
It's
it again and there's more hair and it won't stick together at all, and eventually it was like they aren't going to stick whatsoever. That's what
and they've
having
likened that
having
to
sex before marriage was. And it was like, and I didn't get it. I mean, what kind of appalled me was just like, why does that become such an important thing? Like, why does that need to be the front and center? Now, I
as
also
as if your virginity card were your ticket into heaven.
right.
Yes.
And yeah,
100%. And oh man, it's good. This is going to go off the rails really quick because here's the way that I'm going to sum up the purity culture. Very much on the law, had no room for grace whatsoever.
mm-hmm.
And what that created in a bunch of people is a legalism that said if you have defiled yourself, you are no longer good enough for the grace of God.
Yeah.
And that is as far from biblical teaching as you can get.
Yeah.
The basic idea of the purity culture is a good idea, and we would argue scriptural. There is one man and one woman, and they should be enjoying sex intimately together, not sharing it with anybody. Like, that is scriptural. There is a faithfulness that exists within the marriage covenant, 100%. But and I shared that clip of Matt Chandler and Who
mm-hmm.
Wants the Rose, right? Like, that's a very impactful, but it's the same thing that you just described with the tape,
mm-hmm.
right? There was no room in the purity culture for grace at all. And I don't want to overgeneralize, but having grown up in this, and I don't think I'm misremembering it very well, it was almost like if you have had sex before marriage, then you aren't even worthy of the grace.
Right. Yeah.
Which, okay, let me just speak from a male's perspective on that, right? Because I've heard this countless times, even at the, look, my tradition is a Baptist tradition, independent fundamental Baptist, which get a horrible bastardization at this point because of just lunatics on the internet right now. But what that created for men specifically was, again, no grace, but even to the point where I heard people say, my future spouse, if she's not a virgin, then she's not worthy of me.
Yes.
And like these are students at a Bible college saying this, and I'm sitting here thinking, well, that ain't right.
Yeah.
That's a problem, because what purity culture created was a bunch of legalists that didn't know how to read the Bible correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And it has created a generation of people now that, as I said to start, like, are kind of deconstructing their faith because of the trauma that was inflicted.
Yeah.
It was right idea, horrific execution.
Yeah. 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 They and this tied similarly, but from a different way. That was really what drew me into the LCMS later, because there's a presentation. It's out there on the internet somewhere. I'm sure if you could find it, and it's called "The Gospel for Those Broken by the Church," and it's by a Dr. Rod Rosenblatt, and he it's a presentation that he gives, and he talks about those who've been hurt by the church, not just purity culture wise, but just all over, being burned, and it has to do with legalism. And he comes back and he says, that's not what the Bible is about. That's not what the gospel is about. And in fact, the gospel is for everyone who is broken. And so realizing that, and that why that was impactful for me was, it's like, yes, I haven't lived my life properly, and more than that, I don't live up to these other people's expectations.
Yes,
in a lot of ways, and this is, I mean, there were things like, we'll go confession. I used to smoke and I used to dip and stuff, and so like that was like frowned upon, and it was just like, because it was part of the being in the army, and so it was these expectations of the purity, not in a sexual sense, but then in all these facets of life.
Correct.
And again, yes, God does call us to holiness, and we are to strive for that, but the emphasis becomes, in those cases, if you're not perfect, you're not worthy. Whereas God says, my son is perfect and he makes you worthy. And that's it. And so that presentation really, and it was the first time, and we've talked about this.
It will be linked in the description to the show, by the way, because I found it. So it will be linked to the description of the show, and everybody should watch it because, like you said, and just what the title is, like, the gospel is for the broken.
Yeah.
Because there is no one who is whole.
Right.
We are all broken by sin. And the last time I checked, there is no degree to which brokenness occurs. It's you're broken or you're not.
Right.
And that's where I think purity culture got it wrong. And that's kind of like the big, and I want to start with this first part of this question is, what is purity? What does purity mean, right? Well, yes, there is a sexual purity, but there is also a doctrinal purity. There's also a lack of, I don't even know which the proper way to say this, but like a lack of sin, right? Purity, right? It's the command to be holy because the Lord your God is holy.
Mm-hmm.
And where purity culture went wrong is we can white knuckle our way into purity.
Mm-hmm.
We can, in a sense, crucify passions to the point where we can make ourselves perfect.
Yeah.
And it missed the entirety of the gospel.
Yeah. And if you think about the biblical witness, the gospels themselves, and what Jesus is doing with the Pharisees, it wasn't because Jesus wasn't really upset with them because they were doing all these things.
Correct.
He was mad at them because they didn't have faith. They didn't believe who he was.
Correct.
They didn't believe what God had said. They thought they had to come up with something more and add on to it. And literally make themselves purer than everyone else around them. And so that's why Jesus blasts them on so many things. It is, you're missing the whole point. And I'd say that also, obviously, that's going to be the paradigmatic or example for like countering purity culture. But you can also look in church history where monks, it was okay, the thing to do was become a monk, because then you would become more pure because you were separated from the world, and you were thought to be more holy in that. Or down the line farther in our own Protestant denominations of the completely pulling away from the world itself to be a pure, the Amish and the Mennonites and that type of thinking come to mind. It's not exactly the same, but it's along those lines that we're going to set up a standard, and those who don't live by that aren't pure, and you guys, everyone else needs to live by that. And then, just as Jesus said with the Pharisees, you guys, well, it was actually Peter, who said that you guys have taught the law that you yourselves can't keep, or Paul, correct, who says that, and you're putting on these burdens, and you yourselves don't do it.
But also, like, sticking in that vein of the Pharisees, also what it created, which is, I think, kind of like you were talking about, like that LMC, not LMCS, but the ECLA, like, and their indecisiveness leading to their essential failure when it comes to sexuality. What purity culture also created is this Pharisaical whitewashed tombs that now are the generation that are supposed to be leading the church.
Yeah.
So you have these things that are adorned on the outside and look great, but yet are dead inside in a lot of ways. Because, and I'm going to reference again, and I'll put it in the description, but it's the idea of what Matt Chandler said in that Who Wants the Rose video, right? You've got this rose being passed around and it's damaged, and like, who wants the rose? It's broken. And this pastor saying, who would want this now? And like, the only answer biblically is that Jesus does want that rose.
Yes.
Like, quite literally, that is why he came into this world, to seek and to save those who are lost, to seek and to save those that are broken. And when it came to the purity culture, and like, to answer the question, purity is not just all about sex, but it is a dimension of it. There is this very real sense that we said, you cannot do this, you cannot do this, you cannot do this. And all that we did was quite literally become Pharisees.
Yep.
And that's what the purity culture was. We forgot about the story of Hosea, where God tells him to marry a prostitute, where she has one of his kids and then has two illegitimate children, and then finds herself whoring herself out in the city, and God says, go to her and get your wife. He didn't say, oh, she's impure, you're gone and done. No, just as Israel has whored itself after other gods.
Yes.
I'm choosing to go and redeem them. Or the woman at the well who had 4 husbands and was living, or 6 husbands, and was living with a man 7 who was not her husband. Right. Jesus didn't say, oh, you're impure, I don't want that rose.
Yeah.
He said, no, I am the living water. Drink and you will never be thirsty again.
Yeah.
And like, what a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
And it damaged a lot of people. And like, I'm very much like shaking my legs beneath me right now. But growing up in that was not easy.
Yeah.
At all. And like, thankfully, you necessarily didn't have to. You had some experiences with it. But like, when I tell you that what you witnessed on that lock-in night, or that FCA card that you swore you wouldn't have sex until you were married, it's like, that was literally every summer camp. That was literally every winter retreat. That was literally like consistently like if you don't have sex before marriage, you get a Boy Scout pin that you can show to St. Peter at the gate. And he's going to be like, oh, you were a virgin till you were married. Congratulations. Welcome to heaven. Like, it was this complete distortion of the gospel.
Well, yeah. And this is just a kind of random insertion to this, but why did they ever have ones about you'll never get divorced? Like camps like that, and like talking about it, things like that. Sign a card that says, after you get married, you'll never get divorced, because that is just as, I mean, well, it is. Jesus equates it with, adultery. If you cause someone to divorce and stuff, so that is just as much sin as having sex before marriage. And yeah, anyway, sorry, it was just a random, like, we don't think about it in those terms.
But I think it all stems from a misrepresentation of what sex is.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Okay.
It's not necessarily that the things that they were saying was wrong, right?
Yep.
That two shall become one. Well, you can't do that with a bunch of different people. Which, okay, I understand all that. But there was this kind of teaching in a way, and I love the way that one pastor puts it, where he says that you can view sex three ways, either as God, as gross, or as gift.
Mm-hmm.
If you view it as God, you're basically, society nowadays that glorifies sex, that sex sells. They worship at the altar of sex. And, I mean, that's no more prevalent than in our society where sexuality is like the preeminent marker of somebody.
Yeah.
Right? Or you can view it as gross, which is essentially what the purity culture was. Sex is gross. Sex is dishonorable. Sex is not something that you do with anybody. It's, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's disturbing, so save it for the one that you want to spend the rest of your life with. Right? Like, that was the message, right? It's gross, it's nasty, so save it for the one that you want to spend the rest of your life with. Or you can, as I would argue, biblically view sex as a gift, that it is meant for one man and one woman, that it is given by God for pleasure, for recreation, right? Be fruitful and multiply. Mm-hmm. But there's also an element of glorifying God through the marriage covenant, right? And the intimacy that is built there. I mean, Genesis 2:25 is very clear. Adam and Eve were naked and unashamed because of the intimacy that existed. And they were commanded, be fruitful and multiply. Like, it was this misrepresentation of sex that led to this damaging message that ultimately was just pure legalism. Hey everybody, just want to thank you once again for spending some time with the Two Chaps pod today. If you're on YouTube, make sure that you've liked and subscribed to our channel. Pound that bell for notifications so you can be notified when our latest content drops. If you're on social media, we are all over the place, including the brand new Threads from Meta. And I do want to remind you, for longer content, including pre-show and post-show audio, make sure you've subscribed on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. We'll be back next week with a new episode of the Two Chaps Pod, and until then, stay uncultured.